Episodes of Palette Swap are suggested by viewers like you. If there's a character you'd like me to analyze, let me know in the comment section down below. Good morrow everyone, Silvershire here, and welcome back to Palette Swap, where I rank the costumes and character designs of your favorite fighting games. And by your favorite fighting games, I mean my favorite fighting games, and by my favorite fighting games, I mean Soulcalibur. Today, we're looking at a classic tale of rags to riches to retrograde amnesia, Amy Sorel, as well as her future self, Viola. But before we begin our analysis, here's a quick refresher course on who Amy is and what we should be looking for in her character designs. Amy was a street urchin who grew up in the slums of France after losing her parents to the Black Plague. Wow, starting things off on a real positive note, huh? One day, she saw a nobleman named Amy Sorel being chased by some soldiers. If you want to know why, you can check out episode 15 of this series. Amy couldn't care less about his plight, but she despised the soldiers for how they treated the slum's denizens, so she lied to them about which way he had gone. Raphael was touched by this act of kindness, and he became obsessed with paying it back and then some. So, he adopted her, smuggled her to Spain, taught her how to defend herself, smuggled her back to France, ingratiated himself to an old rich guy, poisoned the old rich guy, inherited the old rich guy's fortune, used it to pay for Amy's education, hired a bunch of maids to serve her every need, and went off in search of the cursed sword Soul Edge and/or the holy sword Soulcalibur in order to reforge the world into a perfect utopia. And also he turned into a vampire at some point. During the 17-year time skip between Soulcaliburs 4 and 5, an unknown event caused Amy to go missing. She woke up in the woods with no memories and a magic orb that lets her glimpse into other people's souls. Now, accompanied by a Hot Topic werewolf voiced by Matt Mercer, she travels the world as a fortune teller, one who knows the future better than the past. Amy's first appearance is actually in the intro to Soulcalibur 2. I'm not going to give this one a score because it's not one of her playable costumes, but I think it's interesting to see what the artists had to work with when turning her into an actual fighter. This is from before Raphael adopted her, so her clothes are plain, ragged, and dirty. She's wearing her hair in pigtails, which, as I mentioned in the Talem episode, is a stereotypically childish hairstyle that communicates her youth. Her palette is mostly made up of drab browns and tans, but there is a little bit of green to complement her red hair. Not much of this design gets carried into later games, which I think was intentional. It shows the drastic transformation she goes through after meeting Raphael. So on that note, let's get to her actual costumes. Her Soulcalibur 3 1P is a much nicer dress. She still has red pigtails, but now they're styled into a corkscrew shape. In Japanese media, this hairstyle is associated with ojo, which is a term for fancy, upper-class young women. Even without that context, it's more elaborate than most of Soulcalibur's hairdos, which implies some level of wealth and privilege. On top of that, it's a unique trait that makes Amy easily recognizable, even a few games from now when she becomes Viola. This costume also introduces her two main recurring motifs, those being skulls and roses, which would be an awesome band name or a terrible perfume. I like that they worked some dark imagery into her otherwise prim and pretty design, as it ties into her dour and apathetic personality, as well as the fact that she's the daughter of a vampire. Her palette is mostly shades of purple, which is a color historically associated with wealth and nobility. Interestingly, she and Raphael have swapped colors since the last game, as he's now wearing green. To be honest, that's probably just a coincidence, but you could interpret it as their relationship being so strong that their fashion senses are rubbing off on one another. This outfit could stand to be fancier to match Raphael's, and it's a bit more revealing than I'm comfortable with considering she's like 15. But despite those criticisms, this is one of Soulcalibur 3's best bonus character designs. She has a clear identity, and I can see why she was promoted to a main character in the future. 8 out of 10. In the console version, her 2P is a recolor of her 1P. I like the white and black palette, especially when paired with the bright red of her roses, but I don't think it was applied to her dress very well. Her 1P is broken up into sections of dark purple and lavender, which adds variety and helps details such as the trim of her skirt stand out. Her 2P is just one big block of white with black along the edges. I do appreciate that it changes her lipstick to a darker shade though. That's a unique touch. 7 out of 10. In the arcade version, she instead gets a bespoke 2P, although it's still similar to her 1P. In fact, the main part of her dress appears to be the exact same model. Aside from the lighter color palette, the main differences are that she's wearing a fascinator hat, her pigtails are straight, she has sleeves with poofy shoulders, and there's an oversized bow on her back. She still has skulls and roses, but neither of them are as prominent in the design. Despite not changing much, I think this costume is a huge step down from her 1P. It's trying too hard to be young and cutesy and just makes her look like a doll. Also, this hair is not nearly as unique or pretty as her signature style. 4 out of 10. Unlike most of Soulcalibur 4's designs, Amy's 1P isn't very complicated, but that's not to say it's lacking in detail. Her dress is lined with fur, which makes it seem more expensive and adds some texture. There's also a subtle rose pattern on the red sections. Her hair is more voluminous, which along with her bell sleeves and wider skirt gives her a stronger and more distinct silhouette. Her stockings now feature moths, or night butterflies as they're called in-game. This may symbolize her metamorphosis from a downtrodden street urchin into a pampered rich girl, or her more literal metamorphosis into a Malfested. Her color palette is darker and less saturated than the previous game, which fits her gloomy personality but isn't as striking or extravagant. 7 out of 10. For some reason, her 2P is just a palette swap again, but the colors are spread out better than in Soulcalibur 3. The rose pattern on her dress is much more obvious now that it's white on red, and the fur being white makes it seem even fancier. Even though this is a simpler and technically less saturated palette than her 1P, I like the strong contrast. It's just too bad she doesn't have a unique alternate costume. 8 out of 10. Soulcalibur V marks the first and only appearance of Viola. Her outfit bears many similarities to Amy's 1Ps, and normally I would list them all, but someone already did the hard work for me, so you can pause the video if you want to check those out. Instead, I'm going to focus on the differences. She's wearing a hood that gives her a mysterious vibe and strings of pearls that call to mind the jewelry often worn by fortune tellers. Her hair is longer, though she still has a couple of curly bits in the front, they're no longer in pigtails, which makes her look more mature. The color of her hair has changed as well. It's now a light purplish silver, much like Ivy. Also much like Ivy, she has metallic claws on one hand, which she uses both as a weapon and a way to command her orb. Maybe that means her powers are some kind of alchemy like Ivy's. She still has a rose motif, but no skulls, and there are moths on her stockings again, but now they're set against a spiderweb pattern. If the moths represent Amy's identity, then being caught in a web could represent the loss of that identity now that she's without a home and without her memories. I know a lot of Amy fans were disappointed that she changed so drastically, but as someone who didn't particularly care about Amy prior to Soulcalibur VI, I thought it was a cool change of pace. Plus, having a child character grow up into an adult was a great way to visually communicate the time skip. I have no real criticisms of this design, though it's lacking that little something extra to wow me. 9 out of 10. Her 2P, on the other hand, is very unlike anything Amy has worn. It leans into the mystical fortune teller angle, and according to an artist's note, it draws inspiration both from ancient Greek oracles and the Eastern European Romani people, the latter being an especially good fit for Viola since it was Romani fortune tellers called Drabardi who popularized the use of crystal balls for divination. Her hair is slightly wavy, but lacks its signature curls, and the only bit of imagery calling back to Amy is the rose insignia on her dress. Though I'm usually all for recurring motifs, I like that there's a version of Viola who feels totally like her own character. She has a red, brown, gold, white, and purple palette, which sounds like a lot when I list it all out. However, most of those colors are reserved for small accents, and of the two main colors, one of them is quite desaturated, so they aren't all competing for the viewer's attention. Further, they're all warm colors, or neutral in the case of white, so it feels cohesive. This is a 10 out of 10. Soulcalibur VI is a reboot of the series, so Amy is back to being Amy. Her outfit is based on the Gothic Lolita style, which is a Japanese fashion trend inspired by Victorian-era women's clothing. All of Amy and Viola's costumes tap into this aesthetic to an extent, but none so much as her Soulcalibur VI design. She has a much bulkier silhouette due to the shawl around her shoulders and the huge dome-shaped skirt. She also now has tall, lacy gloves that match her stockings and are somewhat reminiscent of Raphael's. This costume's ornate details do a great job of communicating her wealth and social status. The skull motif is way less prominent, only appearing on her headdress and shoes, and the moth motif is gone entirely. However, the rose motif is stronger than ever. In addition to the actual roses on her shawl and shoes, her entire outfit is covered in rose patterns. This actually ties into her gameplay, as she can now throw roses at her opponent to increase her rose perception, which lets her do a whole bunch of fancy attacks. Her palette is predominantly fuchsia, which works well for Amy because it's a mixture of her two usual colors, purple and red. An interesting detail about her character model is that there's a scar on her leg. As seen in her Soul Chronicle, her leg was permanently injured during a battle with the Birds of Passage, which is used as an explanation for why she doesn't fight exactly like Raphael. The scar is sort of a hidden Easter egg, because it's usually covered up by her stockings, which remain intact even when her equipment breaks. What's really cool about this scar is that it's a reference to her concept art from Soulcaliburs 2 and 3. I'm sure this injury was originally just meant to make her look a little more pathetic, but almost 2 decades later, the writers decided to retroactively give it some story significance, which is awesome. Goes to show you just how much the Soulcalibur VI team loves the series' history. I guess you could say they rose to the occasion. 10 out of 10. Soulcalibur VI doesn't have any alternate costumes, but it does have alternate colors. And let's be honest, given Amy's track record, she probably would have just gotten alternate colors anyway. Her color 2 is blue and white, matching the particle effects of her new white rose attacks. It contrasts her hair well, and though I personally prefer the default, this is a decent alternative. 9 out of 10. Her color 3 is white and pink with dark hair, much like her old 2Ps. I don't have much to say about this one, but it's pretty. 9 out of 10. Lastly, her color 4 gives her Viola's palette, right down to the pale skin and glowing pink eyes. I'm surprised they didn't let her hair down to better match Viola, especially since almost every other character has at least one costume that changes the model in some way. Despite that, this looks great, and it's her most unique ult. 10 out of 10. And with that, we have ranked every single Amy and Viola costume. Though there's not many of them, they make a strong impression. She takes a pretty common trope, that being the spoiled little rich girl, and puts her own unique spin on it. Get it? Spin, cause she spins? Well, that's just my opinion, so what do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below if you agree or disagree with any of my rankings. Also, let me know which character you'd like to see next. For episode 31, we'll be discussing Sophitia, as requested by Scott Adams. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, I bid thee farewell.